Are you ready for the economic and political changes ahead of us? What can history teach us about surviving crises and how to act in uncertain times? Stay tuned. I'm going to be straight with those listening now. And Rai, if you think I'm talking nonsense, feel free to speak up. The truth is, nobody is going to save anyone. If you look at history and even hear everything that's been said on the subject, you'll realize that things are complicated. A level of difficulty is coming that many of us have never experienced. Companies will fail, people will lose jobs, and many will struggle even to get food. These things always happen for the same reasons, and often only once in a lifetime. If you don't take a moment to see how things worked in the past, you'll end up regretting it. There's a pattern that repeats itself, and we are at a specific point in that pattern. To understand this, not just because it has happened before, but how it works, it's good to have a sense of how to deal with the situation. For example, between 1929 and 1932, there was a debt crisis caused by excessive debt accumulated during the good years. In 1932, interest rates hit zero, and it was quite similar to 2008 when the central bank printed money and bought financial assets. Normally, in such cycles, central banks can boost the economy by lowering interest rates. But once rates go to zero, that doesn't work anymore. The last time this happened was in 1932. And back then they did what they did in 2008. Printed a mountain of money and bought government bonds. We're in that now. Just to be clear, when someone buys a government bond, the government is basically saying, "Hey, buddy, I'll use it to build something roads, whatever, but I'll pay you back later with interest." I imagine that makes the offer appealing. The government buys these bonds to provide liquidity to those who lent the money. Think about it. The government, companies, and individuals can create money. So the central bank has the power to set taxes, take money from people, and spend it as it pleases. But they can't just print money like that. That's the central bank's job. And the central bank, like the Federal Reserve, also can't spend the money and decide how it's used. That's the role of Congress. Every person, company, and government has a certain amount of money coming in as income, has expenses and then savings. This applies to everyone. If your income drops and becomes less than your expenses, things get complicated unless you have good savings to draw on. Many people out there are experiencing this situation. So, the US government, both parties of it, needs to provide money, and then they print. We say print, but in reality, it's more digital than paper, and this ends up coming in the form of loans. Basically, they're creating digital money and allocating it to the government, which decides how to spend it. The Federal Reserve, for example, buys government bonds as well as corporate bonds. They can choose one or several companies and say, "I'm going to buy your bonds," which is like saying, "I'm going to lend you money." This has happened many times in history. What we're facing now is quite similar to what happened between 1930 and 1945. And what can the average person understand from this? They may not have bonds or even know what their 401k is, or they may not even have one. So, how do they deal with it? Is it just trying to do the best to weather this tough phase? Or is there something they can learn from history to make life easier? The answer is that it's very similar for everyone and every company. If you grasp this, you will realize there are three important points. First, you need to take a look at your income, expenses, and savings and do a stress test to protect your situation. If you lose income or it drops significantly, it's time to think about what to do. Do you need to look for unemployment insurance or something like that? How long can you get by without any problems? Do you have enough savings for that? Then, what you need to do is think, if I live more simply and earn this amount, How long could I sustain myself? Which countries or times handled these crises well, coming out of them with minimal pain? An example of this is how Roosevelt faced the situation. Between 1929 and 1932, interest rates dropped to zero. They printed a mountain of money. Wealth inequality increased. And then they sat down to figure out how to maintain order and change things, whether through taxes or reorganizations, to make the system function better. But there's also a risky side, because the whole world was going through this. There was a risk of conflicts. In Germany, Hitler came to power in 1933. He rose to power that year because there was a lot of internal fighting to establish order. Everyone from the left to the right, the communists and fascists, were scrambling for resources, because in times of recession, everyone wants wealth. At that time, some democracies chose to stop being democratic because the situation was so chaotic that people wanted a strong leader to control the country. Of course, this led to several authoritarian leaders, which ultimately resulted in World War II. So, by observing this, you see the political landscape of the time. But back to the average citizen and their finances. What's important are these three main points. Have a plan and, if possible, involve your family in it. And what is the importance of education? When we think about protecting the next generations, how much of that depends on education? Education is fundamental. I grew up in a family with little money. My dad was a jazz musician and my mom was a housewife. But I was lucky to have parents who cared about me. And I went to a public school where I received a good education and entered a world of equal opportunities. I believe this is essential. You need to know how to read, write, and have a basic understanding of math. But you also need to know how to behave well with others, be a good citizen, and act civilly to be able to get a job. Education can be anything that works for you. I believe there are three main points that are super important. Make your work and your passion one thing and turn that into something that makes you money. If you love what you do, you're more likely to be good at it. So, you aim for those things, and it ties into the economic question. It can be anything, even learning a trade. Education doesn't strictly need to be a college. I think college is overrated. With what's coming in the next 3 to 5 years, what can people do, looking through a historical lens, to protect themselves from emotional and financial harm, whatever means most to them? Some things I thought about and mentioned earlier include having a plan for the worst-case scenario and turning it into something positive. It's important to understand how to solve problems effectively and find your paths and your essence. One thing that has helped me a lot is meditation. It's a healthy practice. It reduces stress and also makes you sharper. It helps you make better decisions because if you're centered and have a plan in mind, you'll be able to talk to others and get advice without being trapped in your own thoughts. That already makes a huge difference. One of the lessons I learned in 1971, which repeated itself afterward, is that the surprises that happened in my life were often linked to events that didn't happen in my generation, but in previous generations. For example, in 1971, I was working on the New York Stock Exchange. On August 15th, Nixon severed the link between gold and the dollar basically. It was like a default. I entered the stock market expecting a financial crisis and believing that the market would crash. But what happened was that the market went up. I studied history and realized that something similar happened on March 5, 1933, when Roosevelt took similar actions. This understanding helped me clarify what was going on. In recent years, 3 major things have happened in my life that hadn't happened before. The first is the amount of devaluation and money injection happening in the system. The second is the level of internal political, social, and economic conflicts we're seeing. And the third is the rise of China as a major power, challenging the established world order and power. When I was born in 1949, 4 years after the end of World War II in 1945, the United States was super dominant, with 80% of the world's gold, 50% of the global economy, and a monopoly in terms of military power due to nuclear weapons. This dominance has been decreasing over time. This led me to research the last 500 years to understand the rise and fall of currencies, reserves, and empires. During this research, I realized that natural phenomena like droughts, floods, and pandemics caused even greater impacts than wars. The biggest factor, of course, is humanity's capacity to adapt and invent. Over the years, per capita income has increased and living standards have improved, but these major cycles and events are predominant. They summarize almost everything happening around us. I believe we're in a phase of high demand for debt and credit because one person's debt is another person's asset. This is leading us toward a stagflation scenario. In other words, transactions are going to become more challenging. Moreover, I believe political influence is the most important factor now. We are accustomed to a scenario where the economy is the main force. A global economy means that whoever can produce more efficiently has a better chance of growth. This competition was driven a lot by economic issues and resource displacements. But I think this paradigm is shifting. We are moving toward a scenario where ideological issues will strongly influence how resources are allocated. An example of this is Elon Musk's acquisition of Twitter. It's not just a financial transaction, but there are objectives that go beyond money. When political conflicts rise, like Disney's situation with DeSantis in Florida, ideologies end up dominating. The logic is that the economy has to operate within this political agenda, which will bring significant implications. Now, in the third year of an aggressive monetary policy, we are seeing inflationary pressure grow because an enormous amount of money has been injected into the economy, altering this dynamic. As we approach the elections, it's a fact that economic issues will have a major impact on the markets. We'll likely see an increase in political extremism. Moderates are becoming rare, while populism is rising on both the left and right. Looking toward 2024, I worry that neither side will accept defeat. There's a substantial risk that the system is in danger because, historically, when the causes people believe and become more important than the system itself, the situation gets complicated. Therefore, it will be extremely crucial not just to diversify your investments well, but also to manage long and short positions across different assets to perform favorably in this environment. My main observations are, first, money is losing value, and second, bonds and debts are also unlikely to perform well. Claims on financial assets are uncertain. Deciding whether we should avoid those types of assets or position ourselves correctly is critical. We are experiencing a significant transition, akin to a major commodity cycle, where companies are adapting less to these new environments, resulting in less investment. Understanding this scenario is essential. The relationships between financial claims and real assets have significant implications. History shows that when financial claims exceed real assets, the problematic environment rises for maintaining debt, leading to negative real returns. When positioning a portfolio, it's important to be aware of this context. In our tactical discussions, we talk about separating alpha and beta. This segmentation helps achieve better balance and reduce risks by investing in assets that stand out during inflationary periods. Investors need to reassess their portfolios based on these guidelines, as traditional approaches are vulnerable in the current climate. The rise in inflation should guide strategic decision-making moving forward. Overall, I believe that conflicts, both social and political, will become a crucial factor for future investments. Therefore, it's essential to evaluate countries and companies based on criteria such as financial stability, productivity, and civility. When considering the risk of international conflicts, especially with ongoing geopolitical tensions, it's essential to pay attention to regions that are less affected, like emerging Asia and India. Identifying neutral countries and preventing governments from having excessive control over capital markets will be key to ensuring investment security. To conclude, currencies serve two main roles: to act as a medium of exchange and to function as a store of wealth. We are living in a world with several fiat currencies facing similar fundamental problems. It's crucial to analyze what constitutes a reliable store of wealth, recognizing that assets need to be effective not only in local contexts but also maintain their value at the international level. The role of gold as a kind of insurance policy in a portfolio is vital, as it presents distinct characteristics compared to traditional currencies and offers stability in times of uncertainty. A diversified approach, which includes traditional assets with gold as a form of protection, may be our best strategy as we move forward, especially in unstable economic climates. Money may not be the best asset class for investors, especially considering that central banks are injecting more money into the system. A well-diversified portfolio, along with effective tactical adjustments, has the potential to outperform money, especially during periods of economic recession, as has been observed in previous market stresses. Did you like what you saw? Leave your like, share your opinions in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more content that will transform your view on money and the economy.